If you are a sci-fi lover, then you have seen the concept of cryonics in films like Avatar, Alien, A Space Odyssey, Oblivion, The 100 and many more, where cryopreservation is the order of the day. Several scenes are shown where characters are transported into the future in what is generally referred to as cryo sleep. Is it actually possible and no longer a matter of science fiction? First off, in physics, cryogenics is the production and behavior of materials at very low temperatures. The field of cryogenics involves temperatures below -153 degrees Celsius, or if you prefer, 120 Kelvin or -243.4 Fahrenheit. Permanent gases like nitrogen have boiling points below 120 Kelvin. Nitrogen is a liquid under -195.8 degrees Celsius, or if you prefer, 77 Kelvin, and is the most common refrigerant used in cryopreservation. Other common refrigerants have boiling points above 120 Kelvin. Cryonics, therefore, is the low-temperature freezing, usually at -196 degrees Celsius or 320.8 Fahrenheit, and storage of human remains mostly in liquid nitrogen, with the hope that resurrection may be possible in the future. Cryonics is generally viewed as a pseudoscience. As a result of cryonics, our understanding of death continues to evolve. Someone who would have been declared dead decades ago may still have a chance today. Death used to be when a person's heart stopped, then when their heart couldn't be restarted, and is now being extended further. Death is only permanent when the structures encoding memory and personality, which are necessary for consciousness, have become so disrupted that it becomes theoretically impossible to recover the person. When someone is dying, the transition from alive to dead is not instantaneous. It takes time to die. Doctors can use this time to try and save the person and are often successful. When it is impossible or inappropriate to reverse the dying process, this is when cryonics becomes relevant. Cryonics is currently the best known method for pausing the dying process in a way that allows for potentially restoring good health with medical technology in the future. Cryonics is a sort of ambulance to the future. Cryonics procedures can begin only after the patients are clinically and legally dead. Cryonics procedures may begin within minutes of death, and use cryoprotectants to try and prevent ice formation during cryopreservation. It is, however, not possible for a corpse to be reanimated after undergoing vitrification, as this causes damage to the brain, including its neural circuits. Vitrification is the transformation of a substance into a glassy solid. Vitrification can preserve biological structure very well, much better than freezing. High concentrations of cryoprotectants permit biological tissue to be cooled to very low temperatures with little to no ice formation. It is now possible to physically vitrify organs as large as the human brain, achieving excellent structural preservation without freezing. Methods for repairing biological structure at the molecular level can now be foreseen. Nanotechnology will lead to the capability of extensive tissue repair and regeneration, including repairing individual cells one molecule at a time. This future nanomedicine could theoretically recover any cryopreserved person where the structures encoding memory and personality remain invariable. Early attempts of cryonic preservations were performed in the 1960s and early 1970s, which ended in failure, with all except one of the companies going out of business, and their stored corpses thawed and disposed of. In April 1966, the first human body was frozen, though it had been embalmed for 2 months by being placed in liquid nitrogen and stored at just above freezing. The middle-aged woman, whose name is unknown, was soon thawed out and buried by relatives. James Bedford was the first person to be cryopreserved and then frozen with the hope of future revival. Alcor's Mike Darwin claimed this occurred within around 2 hours of his death in January 1967. Bedford's corpse is still preserved today. As of 2014, about 250 bodies had been cryopreserved in the United States. Today, nearly 200 dead patients are frozen in Alcor's cryogenic chambers at temperatures of -196 degrees Celsius, including a handful of celebrities, who have paid tens of thousands of dollars for the goal of possible revival, and ultimately, reintegration into society. Alcor is the leading example of the current state of cryonics. The United States has consolidated around 2 main organizations. If not Alcor, your other choice is the Cryonics Institute. At Alcor, cryonic preparations employ a multi-step process to prepare the body for storage. First, They begin to cool the body while anti-clotting agents and organ preservation solutions are injected into the bloodstream and circulated under CPR. The body is then transported to the company's main facility, where the original fluid is replaced with chemicals that vitrify, turn to glass, the body's organs. This offers some hope for cutting down on structural damage during the subsequent cooling and storage. Then the body is entombed in its Dewar capsule. The ideal procedure at Alcor is as follows. 1 to 7 days before death, there is a standby team waiting near a dying person, so they may begin immediately after cardiac arrest. Next, the cryopreservation process begins as soon as a dying person experiences cardiac arrest and can be declared legally dead. At this point, they are still early in the dying process, with cells and organs still viable. Next, stabilization is done within 2 hours of death. Blood circulation and breathing are artificially restored temporarily to protect the brain, and so protective medications can be administered intravenously. The patient is then cooled in an ice water bath and their blood is replaced with an organ preservation solution. Next, transportation is done within 24 hours after death. The cooled patient is carefully transported to Alcor's operating room in Arizona. Next, perfusion is performed where cryoprotectants are perfused into the bloodstream to reduce and even prevent freezing. Uncontrolled freezing would cause damage to the blood vessels, brain and other organs. Perfusion prepares the patient for cryopreservation. Next up, deep cooling is done within a week after death. The patient is cooled down to -196 degrees Celsius, which cryopreserves the patient in a solid state. The patient is now protected from deterioration for theoretically thousands of years and the dying process has been effectively stopped. Finally, long-term care is done for decades. The patient is stored in a vacuum-insulated metal dewar at subfreezing temperatures using liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen is topped up regularly and the dewars require no electricity. The patient will remain in long-term care until revival becomes possible. No cryonics organization can currently revive a cryopreserved patient, but Alcor have confidence revival may be possible. Nanotechnology and other future medical technologies are expected to have very broad capabilities. While cryonic preparation is now more advanced, the laws of physics demand that the structure of the body will break down rapidly after death, catastrophically upon freezing, and gradually over time, even while frozen. In 1983, Alcor needed to lighten 3 cryonauts, reducing them from bodies to simply heads. In one transhumanist conception of the future, medical science will be able to revive the brain and then simply make a new body or robot to which to attach it. Neuropreservation is cheaper and easier too. The 3 corpses were removed from their Dewar capsules so that the heads could be cut off still frozen, so requiring a chainsaw and stored separately. Alcor employees got to work medically examining the state of the bodies. They wrote up their findings. While the bodies were still frozen, their skin was only moderately cracked in a few places. Cracks appeared in the warming bodies, cutting through the skin and subcutaneous fat, all the way down to the body wall or muscle surface beneath. One patient displayed red traces across the skin following the paths of blood vessels that ruptured. 2 of the patients had massive cutaneous ruptures over the pubis. The soft skin in these areas was apparently quite susceptible to cracking. While the external damage was extensive, the internal damage was worse. Nearly every organ system inside the bodies was fractured. In one patient, every major blood vessel had broken near the heart, the lungs and spleen were almost bisected, and the intestines fractured extensively. Only the liver and kidneys weren't completely destroyed. The third body, which had been thawed very slowly, was in better condition externally, with only a few skin fractures and no obvious exploded blood vessels. However, the inside was even more annihilated than the others. The organs were badly cracked or severed. The spinal cord was snapped into 3 pieces and the heart was fractured. The examiners injected dye into an artery in the arm. Rather than flow through blood vessels and into muscles, most of it pooled under the surface in pockets and leaked out of skin fractures. The medical examiners extensively detailed the content of the blood, the texture of the muscles and the extent of the damage. Their conclusion was, the tremendous tissue deterioration will require incredibly advanced medical technology to fix. Worse, the probable destruction at the cellular level may require rebuilding the body at the molecular level. Perhaps future medicine might be able to inject swarms of nanobots into your body to repair every bit of tissue. Maybe future medicine will find fixes for the terrific damage incurred by the body in freezing, sitting and thawing. Before I continue, let me elaborate on something. A dewar is a thermos bottle full of liquid nitrogen. The inner vessel of the dewar contains a body or bodies wrapped in several layers of insulating material, attached to a stretcher and suspended in liquid nitrogen. The head is oriented downward to keep the brain the coldest and most stable. We have also already seen that Alcor and the Cryonics Institute are the main cryonics organizations in the United States. We have already learned how the process works at Alcor. On the other hand, the Cryonics Institute was founded in 1976 by Robert Ettinger. Robert Ettinger was the first person to scientifically propose the freezing of humans in 1962 when he wrote The Prospect of Immortality. He was a Michigan professor and his corpse was cryopreserved in 2011. The Cryonics Institute's facility is in Clinton Township, Michigan. They specialize in full-body cryopreservation of humans and pets, DNA and tissue storage, as well as cryonics outreach and public education about the science they are engaged in. Moving on, cryonicists argue that as long as brain structure remains intact, there is no fundamental barrier, given our current understanding of physical law, to recovering its information content. They further argue that the brain does not have to be continuously active to survive or retain memory. That a human survives even within an inactive brain that has been badly damaged, provided that original encoding of memory and personality can, in theory, be adequately inferred and reconstituted from what structure remains. In summary, as of 2016, 4 facilities already existed in the world to retain cryopreserved bodies. 3 in the United States and 1 in Russia, CRYOPRESERVATION. Russia's CRYOPRESERVED is the first non-US vendor of cryonics services. In Russia, cryonics falls outside both the medical industry and the funeral services industry, making it easier in Russia than in the United States to get hospitals and morgues to release cryonics candidates. CRYOPRESERVED, which stores bodies communally in large dewars, charges $12,000 to $36,000 for the procedure. As of 2018, the cost of cryonics ranged from $28,000 to $200,000. Considering the life cycle of corporations though, it is unlikely that any cryonics company could continue to exist for sufficient time to take advantage even of the supposed benefits offered. Historically, even the most robust corporations have only the slightest chances of surviving even 100 years. Many cryonics companies have failed as of 2018. For instance, Robert Nelson, a former TV repairman with no scientific background, who led the Cryonics Society of California, was sued in 1981 for allowing 9 bodies to thaw and decompose in the 1970s. He claimed that the Cryonics Society had run out of money. This led to the lowered reputation of cryonics in the United States. The New York Times indicates that cryonicists are predominantly non-religious white males, outnumbering women by about 3 to 1. While most cryonicists used to be young, male and geeky, recent demographics have shifted towards whole families. On the downside, families can also be a major hurdle. For instance, the family of a man frozen in 1978 eventually got tired of paying for him. The facility offered to cut off his head and store it for free, but the family turned them down. Instead, the body was thawed, submerged in formaldehyde like a laboratory specimen, and buried in that condition. 2 men were also stored by their sons, one of whom had his father thawed, removed and buried. The other son eventually buried his dad's capsule in its entirety with the remains still inside. Relatives can also go to court and battle over what happens to your corpse. Richard Orville's family buried him against his wishes and was eventually forced by an Iowa court to dig up his body for preservation. A Colorado woman's family went to court to fight Alcor for their mother's head. Alcor eventually got the head, to preserve as best as they could. Another woman still did not want to be frozen. Her husband froze her anyway, and after a 4-year court battle, the state of California ordered that she be thawed and buried. A frozen Norwegian man was initially stored at a California facility that worked with Alcor. He was removed by his daughter, who stored him in an ice shed behind her house in Colorado. The body was discovered when she was evicted from the property. The small town of Nederland, Colorado, now has a Frozen Dead Guy Days celebration every year. Other obstacles to cryonics are legal issues, as different countries have different laws. Most countries legally treat preserved individuals as deceased persons because of laws that prohibit vitrifying someone who is medically alive. In France, cryonics is not considered a legal mode of body disposal, only burial, cremation and formal donation to science are allowed. However, bodies may legally be shipped to other countries for cryonic freezing. As of 2015, the Canadian province of British Columbia prohibits the sale of arrangements for body preservation based on cryonics. As already stated before, in Russia, cryonics falls outside both the medical industry and the funeral services industry, making it easier in Russia than in the United States to get hospitals and morgues to release cryonics candidates. In London in 2016, the English High Court ruled in favor of a mother's right to seek cryopreservation of her terminally ill 14-year-old daughter, as the girl wanted, contrary to the father's wishes. Lastly, in science fiction, suspended animation is a popular concept. It is often the means by which a character is transported into the future. A survey in Germany found that about half of the respondents were familiar with cryonics, and about half of those familiar with cryonics had learned of the subject from films like Avatar, Idiocracy and many others. Finally, notable cryopreserved people include Du Hong, a 61-year-old female writer of children's literature, became the first known Chinese national to have her head cryopreserved. Baseball player Ted Williams cryopreserved in 2002 and his son John Williams cryopreserved in 2004. Engineer and Dr. L. Stephen Coles cryopreserved in 2014. Economist and entrepreneur Phil Saleen, cryopreserved in 2014. Software engineer and Bitcoin pioneer Hal Finney, cryopreserved in 2014. Notable people who have arranged for cryonics upon death include PayPal founders Luke Nosek and Peter Thiel. Oxford transhumanist philosopher David Pearce. Financier Jeffrey Epstein wanted to have his head and penis frozen after death so that he could seed the human race with his DNA.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button. Stay tuned.